back to this morning. We're talking, thinking, sharing about John chapter 2, which is the water into wine. I'll read the passage to you, then it just kind of refreshes our memories about it. It's probably well known to us all. On the third day, a wedding took place in Cana of Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and his disciples, and Jesus and his disciples had been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." This is the first of the miraculous signs Jesus performed in Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. Have you ever been to a wedding where something's gone wrong? Hey? You want to share? No? No?
At my own wedding, a load of guests turned up that weren't invited to the meal part. They're going around saying, "Well, where are we seating?" I'm like, "Well, you're not on the seating plan because you're not invited to the meal part." A load of relatives.
What?
Great, a load of my relatives.
Oh, right. So did you send them away?
No, they found somewhere to sit.
Yeah. Well, I went to my son's wedding, and his in-laws had made the wedding cake. They're very good at making the wedding cakes, And we were sitting down, where they cut the cake afterwards, and they came up to us and said, "Trying to tell you the top part of the cake is mouldy." They'd made 2 lots of fruit and a sponge on the top, but kind of sponge you have to leave till the last minute. But they didn't leave, but they kind of did it a few days before. But even so, because it's in coasting, they said, "Don't worry about it, we made it." They've got a bottle of wine for it as well. So. But yeah, there are weddings. I mean, if you go on YouTube, you can see quite a few mishaps at weddings that happen where, fights and things happen at weddings and all this kind of stuff. But in the time of Jesus, that when we're talking about this wedding, it wasn't just a day affair. It used to go on for a long time. I don't know how long your weddings took or how long, these days they go on from whatever time it is in the morning to whatever time it is at night. I got married at 2:30 and I was on the way to my honeymoon at 5:30. Well, you didn't have evening parties and all that stuff, do you? So yeah, 3 hours we were all, matched and not quite dispatched, but yeah. So that was then. Anyway, and it was kind of an embarrassment for this to happen. The wine to run out. You're supposed to cater to your guests, but when you read the Bible, you wish there was more information. It doesn't tell you how many people were there. It doesn't tell you how long the wedding went on for. It doesn't tell you whether Mary was related to the people who were getting married, but she seemed to know what was going on. Now, whether somebody came and told her, or whether, some mothers are quite astute, aren't they? What's going on. You don't have to say anything, but they're aware of the situation. Sarah's nodding here.
My mum looks around the place and tells me that family's doing that family's doing that. She predicts the whole lot.
Yeah, there's just something within a lady that have this intuition that things maybe aren't going as planned. And so she introduces or comes to Jesus and says, "They've got no more wine." Now imagine Jesus sitting there with his disciples, having a nice time, And he said, "Well, what's that got to do with me?" Basically, I'll come and serve. But the thing is that when Jesus is involved, he doesn't just stand back. So she told Jesus the problem. So when we get problems and difficulties, who do we tell? Who do we share that with? Because we know. Sorry, Ursula.
Everybody else is saying Jesus.
Well, yeah, that's normally the way, isn't it? We say, yeah, but she went straight to Jesus first. Normally Jesus is our last port of call. We try to work things out ourselves and sort it out, but she went straight to Jesus and said, there's a problem. And he said, "Well, my time's not yet come." But he didn't say my time's not come, so I'm not going to get involved, And I'm not sure I'm following my notes now, so I'll just talk. Yeah, I've lost where I'm at. Yeah, so she told Jesus, and he doesn't stand back and say, well, it's nothing to do with me. He got involved, right? And sometimes we get in situations that are out of our making, that are difficulties. But Jesus comes along and helps us out of those situations. He doesn't turn around and say, well, it's your fault, you got into it, sort yourself out. He comes alongside and he helps. And so they told Jesus, and so he said, Mary said to the servants, do whatever he told you. So you would think that Mary had some kind of responsibility within the wedding. I don't know, because she just said to the servants, do what he said. She was a lady, as well, which didn't have much authority in a way. She didn't go and tell anybody else. She said to the servants, do whatever he told you. And so it says that 6 stone water jars, 20 to 30 gallons, so that's a total of 120 to 180 gallons of water that were going to be turned into wine. Is that the case? We don't know. So jumping ahead of the story, when did the water change to wine? When they went to draw it? We don't know because it doesn't say. But so where did they get the water from? They probably had to go out to a well. And as these pots, these jars held 20 to 30 gallons, and the servants, it says, fill them to the brim. And you would have thought, what's going to happen here? We've kind of filled these with water, which is used for ceremonial washing, and we've run out of wine. Why are we bothering? We're getting ceremonial water for washing when we've run out of wine. Sometimes we might think, well, why are we doing this when this is the situation, this is the problem? But Jesus works in ways that are mysterious to what we want to work. And so I would imagine, I don't know, because it doesn't say, but when the servants were going out, they'd have to go out to the well. Now, I don't know whether you can pick up 5 gallons of water. It's quite heavy to pick up 5 gallons of water. So they'd have to make a few journeys backwards and forwards to fill these 6 water pots to the brim. And when they filled them to the brim, you would have thought the servant said to each other, this is going to be fun. Let's make it as hard as possible. We're going to fill these, water pots to the brim. And so you can imagine them filling right to the brim. So it takes time and effort to fill these water pots to the brim. And when Jesus calls us to do things, it takes time and effort. Now, there's the story in the Old Testament of the jar of oil that never run out. And it was just there and it never ran out. Jesus could quite easily have sat there at the table and said, it's okay, we've got it under control. All the wine jars will stay full. Well, he could have done that. And Jesus sometimes does the miraculous instead of us, but sometimes he calls us to do the work, right? And it takes time and effort. So these servants did the time and effort, and did they mind about it? The wedding's in full swing. Why do we need ceremonial water? Why do we need to do this? But they were obedient and did what they said. And so how long did it take? I mean, they've run out of wine. How many people knew they'd run out of wine? But it takes time and effort to fill 6 water jars, keep going backwards and forwards to fill them up to the brim. But then Jesus said, take it out and draw it out and take it to the master of the banquet. And I call this little bit stepping out in faith. They were going to take this water to give to the master of the banquet. And you think, what am I doing this for? I'm going along with this water to give to the master of the banquet. But my feeling is that when the water was poured into the goblet, the master of the banquet, that's when it changed into wine, right at the last minute. Because otherwise, if it was turned, well, then no, it's all right, we'll pour it. But it takes faith to step out to do what God calls you to do. Other people might, this is ridiculous, taking water to the master of the banquet. And sometimes God calls us to do things that the world might say, that's ridiculous, that's stupid, But being obedient to what God calls us to do is more important. Did the bridegroom know about it? I don't know. It doesn't say. But the master of the banquet calls the bridegroom over and he says, you have your best stuff first and then the rough stuff. Now you give them the best. And God does that in our lives. What I forgot to say was that water is the ordinary, everyday kind of stuff. But Jesus changed it into wine. And it was the best wine. And Jesus takes what we bring, which might not be the best, might not always be, refined in any way, but he takes it and uses it to bring blessing into people's lives. And so Jesus gave the word, they did the deed. They had to carry it out. And sometimes Jesus calls us to step out in faith to do things that sometimes we don't know. You might be a link in the chain that kind of moves things on. So we step out in faith just as they did. And then the last bit, it says the disciples put their faith in him. Because the disciples saw in Jesus somebody who was special, somebody who was unique, just an ordinary man, but did wonderful things. But I think, what about the servant? What did they think? Because they'd seen it happen. Did they put their faith in Jesus? What about the master of the banquet? What about the bridegroom? Jesus done this wonderful miracle for them in that situation. God gives us situations or circumstances where we may be a link in the chain where we bless other people. We might not know why we do it, why not. We say it, why we send a card, why we do a telephone call, why we do a visit. But that link in the chain can be a blessing to somebody further down the line. Because the master of the banquet didn't know where it come from, but he was blessed because of it. So we are that channel that God can use to bring blessing into people's lives. And the song that we started with, Faithful One, So Unchanging, You Are My Rock in Times of Trouble. We all go through times of trouble. We know what's happening over in the Ukraine. The Christians over there are really, but they're crying out to the same God. He is their rock in times of trouble. We live in a peaceful country, but God is still our rock. He's the one that we can depend on, who calls us out to be what he wants us to be, where he wants us to be. Now, maybe you've got favourite films. I've got a favourite film. One of my favourite films is Heaven Almighty. Anybody seen Heaven Almighty? No. Heaven Almighty is about a congressman in America. He's kind of moving up the ladder, and he gets taken over by one of the top dogs, and he's being used, as it were. But God calls him to build an ark, and it causes consternation between him and his wife. And his wife has got, I think it's 3 children, and she said, I can't cope with this. I'm going off to my mother's for a bit. So his wife and the 3 children go off to see his mother, and left poor old Evan to build this ark on his own. And through the story, God keeps, Morgan Freeman keeps interviewing and talking to Evan to build this ark. And one of my favourite parts of the film is what we're going to see now, if it will work. She's gone to the diner. She's on her way to see her mother. Okay, and the three lads have gone off to the toilet. What I like about that is that she then goes back to her husband with the 3 children, and they work together, building the ark. Everybody else is against them, making fun of them. But the children said, "We love it, Dad, because you spend more time with us." And God spends time with us so that we can spend time with other people. And he calls us to step out to do things. And sometimes we don't understand. We don't know why, but what we're called to be is obedient. And this story, Jesus turning water into wine, the first miracle he did. You know, as I've read it and reread it, different things keep coming out to me. Most of all is obedience. Obedience from doing what Jesus said, to what the servants said, to when they poured out to the master of the banquet. We don't know how the wedding finished, we're not told. But I would imagine it was better than it was in the middle when they run out of wine. So whatever God calls us to do, let's step out in faith and do it. Thank you, Dan.